Every family believes its story is anchored in official truth, sealed by ink and authority. But what if the document you trust most reshaped your ancestors' identity? What if names, origins, and bloodlines were not recorded, but negotiated, guessed, or imposed? The uncomfortable reality is that a piece of paper can carry more assumption than fact, yet it is treated as unquestionable evidence. This is not a fringe suspicion, but a structural problem embedded in how records were created. Before you accept what is written, you may need to confront a more unsettling possibility about who your ancestors really were. The paradox of primary sources. You probably trust your family tree. You have traced the lines, collected the documents, and secured that one foundational piece of paper that seems to validate everything: the death certificate. We are taught by institutions and archivists to treat this piece of paper as the absolute final word on a human life. It is the bedrock of modern genealogy, sealed by the state and stamped with official authority. But that trust is misplaced. Consider that the very foundation of your ancestry is built on bureaucratic hearsay. We accept these documents as primary sources, absolute truths set in ink, without ever questioning the fragile, deeply flawed process that created them. Think about that for a second. We build our entire identities around a piece of paper that is, at its core, a magnificent administrative illusion. To understand this massive epistemological crisis, we have to look closely at the central vulnerability of the death certificate: the informant. This is the person legally responsible for providing the personal and historical details of the deceased to the local registrar or the funeral director. In the social sciences, a primary source implies that the person reporting the information actually witnessed the event they are describing. They have first-hand knowledge. Let us apply that standard to a death certificate. The only person with first-hand knowledge of the actual death is usually the attending physician or the medical examiner. They are there for the end. The biographical section of that form demands dates of birth, places of origin, and the names of parents. The informant providing this critical historical data is almost never someone who was present at the birth of the deceased. Often, it is a grieving spouse who might know the later years perfectly, but is relying on decades-old family lore for the early ones. And that is the best-case scenario. Far too often, the informant is a distant landlord, a neighbor, or a hospital clerk simply copying information from an older, equally flawed intake form. It is a grim game of broken telephone played by people who are just trying to close out a file. They lack any first-hand knowledge of the facts they are legally swearing to, yet their guesses become permanent historical records. This creates a steep gradient of accuracy right there on a single sheet of paper. We have been conditioned by systematic incuriosity to view the entire document as equally factual. It is not. On one side of the form, you have forensic, event-based data, the exact time of death, certified by a medical professional. The reliability here is exceptionally high because the informant is a direct witness to the event being recorded. As your eyes move down the page to the lineal data, the reliability plummets. A neighbor making an educated guess about a mother's maiden name is fundamentally hearsay. A landlord estimating a birth year is just an assumption. Yet, the state packages these guesses right next to the clinical facts, binding them together under one official seal. We are looking at a document that is simultaneously a highly accurate primary record of a death and a highly suspect secondary record of a life. Professional researchers recognized this catastrophic vulnerability a long time ago. They realized that treating these documents as infallible was destroying the integrity of historical records. Their response was the development of the genealogical proof standard, known as the GPS. You can think of the GPS not as some perfect, magical solution, but as a necessary, desperate defense mechanism against these inherently flawed, sealed entries. It demands that researchers actively hunt for primary birth and marriage records to verify the secondary fragments found on a death certificate. It forces us to resolve contradictory evidence through rigorous correlation rather than intellectual laziness. The GPS is an acknowledgement by the experts that the official state record is compromised from the moment the ink dries. It stands as a stark warning to anyone digging into their past. The absolute greatest danger in historical research is the blind acceptance of the pre-printed box. When we fail to challenge the authority of that box, we allow administrative errors to rewrite our history, replacing the truth of who we were with the convenience of an institutional guess. Divergent paths of historical testimony. To understand how we ended up relying on such a fragile foundation for our identities, we have to trace the evolution of the pre-printed box itself. The modern death certificate is not some ancient, unshakable cornerstone of civilization. It is a relatively recent bureaucratic invention. The earliest iterations were 17th-century bills of mortality and localized parish registers. These were highly inconsistent documents, primarily concerned with tracking plagues or managing church populations, rather than preserving objective historical truth. The aggressive push for standardized national forms only emerged later, driven by a massive era of global administrative synchronization between the years 1870 and 1920. Governments suddenly realized they needed to catalog their citizens with industrial efficiency, yet, as nations moved to streamline this data, the United Kingdom and the United States took fundamentally different paths regarding the hierarchy of testimony. Early British registration, established around 1836, was plagued by incredible institutional hand-waving. It focused heavily on centralizing administrative power, but severely lacked any rigorous medical or testimonial standards. This procedural laxity meant suspicious deaths could easily be concealed, and stillbirths frequently went entirely unrecorded because medical confirmation simply was not mandatory. Recognizing these massive structural loopholes, the British Parliament enacted the Births and Deaths Registration Act of 1874. This legislation was a turning point because it institutionalized a strict hierarchy of testimony. It dictated exactly who possessed the legal duty to report a death. By law, this heavy responsibility fell first to the nearest relatives who were present at the death or during the person's final illness. The British mandate went even further, legally requiring the attending medical practitioner to sign a certificate of cause, which had to be delivered directly to the registrar. This was a deliberate attempt to enforce legal accountability, ensuring the individual providing the historical and medical facts actually possessed the most direct knowledge of the event. Across the Atlantic, the United States experienced a profound administrative failure that permanently distorted genealogical research. Consistent statewide civil registration was virtually non-existent in America until the early 20th century. Before that point, national mortality data was sporadically gathered through wildly inefficient decennial census mortality schedules, which were widely recognized as deeply flawed. Desperate to catch up with international standards, the United States Bureau of the Census rolled out the first standard certificate of death in the year 1900. They strongly encouraged independent registration areas across the country to adopt this uniform reporting document. The resulting structural gap is staggering. American officials eagerly copied the physical layout and the authoritative aesthetic of the British standard, but they completely ignored the underlying legal framework of personal accountability. The newly adopted American standard left the critical informant line completely open to whoever happened to be the most convenient person in the ability room at that exact, precise moment. There was no strict statutory requirement demanding that the informant be the nearest relative or even someone remotely close to the deceased. Frequently, the immense task of providing profound biographical and lineal details fell directly to the local undertaker, a distant acquaintance, or an exhausted hospital clerk. The system fully embraced total procedural laxity. This profound lack of verification standards allowed vital biographical details to be legally certified by distant strangers playing careless guessing games. The primary goal of the American system was clearly never rigorous historical accuracy. By prioritizing convenience and rapid paperwork processing over a strict hierarchy of testimony, The United States essentially prioritized administrative closure over objective historical truth. They baked systemic incuriosity right into the foundational documents of millions of citizens, prioritizing a smoothly filed record over a factual one. This reckless approach permanently infected our vast national archives, leaving modern researchers to grapple with a grim legacy, where official state records are often little more than sanctioned rumors, wrapped tightly and securely in the persistent illusion of absolute, unquestionable bureaucratic authority. The clinical mirage of death. Whenever we look at the medical portion of a death certificate, we assume we are looking at objective forensic science. We believe this section is immune to the hearsay of the biographical fields, trusting that a doctor or official has applied rigorous diagnostic standards to determine exactly how a life ended. The actual reality of this practice is deeply unsettling. Research conducted across major academic institutions reveals that cause of death statement error rates consistently fall between 33 and 41%. In some hospital-based studies, these discrepancies skyrocket to an astonishing 96%. Today, we are treating a document with a massive failure rate as the absolute clinical truth. This illusion of infallibility obscures a system plagued by rigid constraints, alarming incompetence, and profound financial conflicts. Part of this massive error rate stems from a bureaucratic straitjacket introduced by public health officials in the year 1910. They added the manner of death field to the standard certificate, attempting to categorize the circumstances of mortality. This addition forces complex, nuanced human tragedies into 5 incredibly rigid, binary categories. These 5 choices are natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined. The messy reality of human life rarely fits neatly into these boxes. A death resulting from acute drug toxicity, for instance, might be a chronic consequence of severe substance abuse spanning decades, yet it is frequently funneled into the accident category because there is no explicit evidence of immediate intent. This limited taxonomy strips away the crucial context of human suffering, leaving behind a sanitized checkmark that satisfies the state but utterly masks the reality of how people are actually dying. The accuracy of this medical record is further compromised by the shocking qualifications of the people signing the forms. In many local jurisdictions across the entire United States, the medieval coroner system remains fully active. There is a massive divide between an appointed medical examiner, who is typically a trained forensic pathologist, and an elected coroner. Because coroners are elected political officials, many states require them to possess absolutely zero medical training, zero forensic knowledge, and zero board certification. A very significant portion of historical and modern vital records have been certified by individuals who literally lack the medical education to accurately identify a cause of death. Instead of rigorous science, they rely on lowest common denominator standards, frequently defaulting to vague cardiovascular diseases when the actual etiology remains a complete mystery to them. Beyond the issue of sheer incompetence, the official medical record is heavily distorted by deliberate financial negotiation. The classification of a death carries immense social and economic weight, particularly regarding life insurance policies. Historically and presently, many policies contain strict suicide exclusion clauses that completely void financial payouts if the insured commits suicide within a specific period, usually lasting for 2 years. This creates an intense, unspoken negotiation between grieving families and sympathetic physicians. To ensure the financial survival of the beneficiaries, doctors face massive pressure to falsify the manner of death, classifying an obvious suicide as a mere accident or a natural event. This deeply tragic situation is certainly not a rare occurrence. This financially incentivized falsification leads to an estimated 17.9% global underreporting of suicides. The vital public document that modern historians and academic epidemiologists rely heavily upon to track national mental health crises is routinely altered, simply to secure insurance payouts. Ultimately, the clinical record transforms from a scientific diagnosis into a negotiated settlement, proving once again that the death certificate is fundamentally designed to close an administrative file rather than to preserve the objective truth. The weapon of paper genocide. Perhaps the darkest application of this vast administrative power is the deliberate weaponization of the death certificate to execute a literal paper genocide. This concept is not a dramatic exaggeration born of historical revisionism. It is the highly calculated, state-sanctioned removal of an entire group of people from the permanent historical record. The goal is to justify massive land seizures, rewrite regional history, and diminish the political relevance of marginalized communities. The absolute blueprint for this bureaucratic eradication was drawn in early 20th century Virginia under the ruthless direction of Dr. Walter Ashby Plecker. As the head of the State Bureau of Vital Statistics, Plecker was a virulent, outspoken proponent of eugenics who sought the absolute elimination of Virginia's indigenous populations. He quickly realized he did not need to deploy physical armies to erase people. He only needed absolute control over the pre-printed boxes of vital records. He utilized the sweeping authority of the 1924 Racial Integrity Act to achieve his goals. This legislation legally mandated a rigid, inescapable binary classification system, forcing every single citizen to be categorized strictly as either white or colored. Plecker systematically weaponized this binary against the living and the dead alike. He launched an aggressive, state-funded campaign to retroactively alter decades of existing legal documents. His office literally scratched out the word Indian on countless census forms and death records, maliciously replacing it with the numerical code for colored. By the year 1943, his campaign reached a terrifying peak. Plecker was actively distributing official blacklists containing specific tribal surnames to local registrars and hospitals across the entire state. He demanded that no individual bearing those family names could ever be legally registered as indigenous on any birth or death certificate. This was a quiet, administrative slaughter. By forcing native populations into this rigid binary and aggressively altering their ancestral documentation, Plecker successfully destroyed the ability of entire tribal communities to claim federal recognition or protect their cultural heritage. The state simply declared through paperwork that they no longer existed. We desperately want to believe this kind of malicious statistical erasure is firmly locked in the distant, prejudiced past. It absolutely is not. The systemic misclassification of human identity remains a massive, ongoing contemporary crisis. A landmark, explosive study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in June of 2025 exposed the staggering reality of modern data genocide. Today, an astonishing 41% of American Indian and Alaska Native descendants are actively misclassified on their death certificates. They are most frequently recorded as white by the bureaucracy. This massive, systemic error rate does not stem from complex medical confusion or missing records. It happens primarily because funeral directors, acting as the legally authorized informants, routinely make careless visual assumptions about the race of the deceased rather than taking the time to actually interview the surviving family members. The real-world consequences of this ongoing procedural negligence are catastrophic for public health and political accountability. Because of this massive 41% misclassification rate, official government statistics drastically and dangerously misrepresent reality. The actual mortality rate for these specific indigenous populations is vastly higher than reported, suffering a staggering 37% underestimation in federal datasets. Even more horrifying, this statistical erasure completely masks a massive disparity in human longevity, hiding a severe 6.5-year life expectancy gap compared to the national average. These are fatal discrepancies hidden in plain sight. When a state fundamentally fails to accurately count the deaths of an entire population, it becomes incredibly easy for federal authorities to simply ignore their severe healthcare crises and quietly abandon vital treaty responsibilities. The death certificate, far from being a passive historical record, continues to function as an active, devastating tool of administrative neglect and systemic erasure. Permanence of digital errors. We currently live under the incredibly profound, dangerous misconception that digitizing old historical records automatically purifies them. The assumption is that transferring physical documents into massive databases somehow scrubs away the procedural negligence of the past. The actual reality we face is far more destructive. The transition of death certificates into the digital realm has simply created a massive digital echo chamber. Digitization does not fix a fundamentally flawed document. It merely takes the hearsay, the wild guesses of distant landlords, and the malicious misclassifications of biased state officials, and launders those historical lies into permanent, searchable facts. We are essentially cementing bureaucratic failures into an unassailable digital bedrock. The frustration compounds when you actually try to correct these deeply entrenched errors through official channels. You immediately run headfirst into a maddening legal fortress known as the amendment trap. Correcting a formal state record is an agonizing process requiring you to provide original, contemporaneous documentation to prove the initial mistake. To fix a biographical error on a death certificate, the state demands another legal document generated around the exact same time. Those parallel documents almost universally contain the exact same errors, created by the exact same flawed administrative systems. The proof you need to fix the lie is fundamentally unavailable. This structural trap is heavily reinforced by modern privacy laws that inadvertently shield historical inaccuracies from proper scrutiny. Under current medical privacy regulations, specifically the 50-year restriction periods, a deceased individual's health information is completely locked away from the public and independent researchers. This time gap is designed to protect surviving family members, but it functionally ensures that blatant biographical and medical errors remain completely unchallengeable during the precise window of living memory. By the time the state finally unseals the file 50 years later, every single person who could have physically testified to the truth, every witness who could have corrected the exhausted informant or the apathetic official, is already dead. The state effectively runs out the clock on the historical truth, silently guaranteeing that the original administrative guess survives entirely unchallenged for the rest of foreseeable human history. This legally protected bad data is then fed directly into modern genealogical platforms. Systems like Ancestry and Family Search deploy aggressive algorithms designed to generate automatic research hints for millions of users based on loose similarities in names, dates, and geographic locations. These platforms engage in massive algorithmic laundering. They take a single clerical error from 1922, digitize it, and suggest it as a historical match to thousands of independent researchers simultaneously. When hundreds of those users casually accept that automated hint and add it to their personal trees, it creates a phenomenon known as false independence. It looks like hundreds of separate people independently verified the same historical event, giving the data a powerful illusion of absolute credibility. Experienced genealogists recognize this catastrophic circular pattern immediately. One single flawed document becomes the unquestioned foundation for dozens of sprawling online family networks. The lie goes viral, recursively interacting with user behavior until the sheer volume of consensus makes the error essentially uncorrectable in the public consciousness. To make matters worse, the optical character recognition technology used to scan these decaying physical records frequently misreads the original faded ink. The machines actually generate entirely new layers of erroneous data, misinterpreting letters and numbers to invent people and places that never even existed. We are not uncovering our true origins with this technology. We are just building a highly efficient, automated engine designed to permanently overwrite our actual human history with an endless stream of confident administrative mistakes. The bureaucracy of intentional deception. We have examined the incompetence of elected coroners, the reckless guessing of distant landlords, and the terrifying permanence of digital algorithms. But sometimes, the profound inaccuracy of the official death certificate is not an accident of the informant or a glitch in the machine. It is a matter of explicit, highly calculated institutional policy. The state actively designs the document to hide the truth from the public record. Consider the devastating early years of the 1980s AIDS epidemic. To shield grieving families from intense social stigma and the catastrophic loss of life insurance payouts, physicians frequently listed pneumonia as the primary cause of death. They actively omitted the underlying cause of severe immune deficiency. This systematic understatement completely obscured the true magnitude of the burgeoning epidemic. By hiding the reality of the crisis on official state documents, medical professionals inadvertently hindered crucial early advocacy for vital public health funding and desperately needed resource allocation. The paper record portrayed a manageable problem, while a generation was decimated. If you believe such deliberate institutional concealment is a relic of the past, you only need to look at a chilling modern parallel operating today. Consider the current policy regarding medical aid in dying within the Canadian province of Quebec. This procedure is strictly regulated and entirely legal for those enduring constant, unbearable physical suffering. Yet, the official death certificate is intentionally falsified by direct government mandate. The official practice guidelines legally instruct Quebec physicians not to record the actual event of medical aid in dying on the form. In fact, that specific terminology is strictly prohibited from appearing anywhere on the document. Instead, the physician is legally forced to enter the underlying disease that initially qualified the person for the procedure as the immediate cause of death. The state record ceases to be a forensic account of how a human being actually died. It transforms entirely into a sanitized record of the condition they suffered from prior to receiving a lethal injection. The state legally mandates a clinical lie to merely protect patient confidentiality and streamline basic insurance settlements. This brings us to the inescapable reality of the pre-printed box. The official state death certificate is simply an administrative seal. It is a subjective bureaucratic tool designed to close a legal file, not to preserve the objective truth of a human identity. Its authority is derived from its status as a state document, yet its integrity is constantly undermined by hearsay, rigid categories, and policy-driven erasure. These historical vital records are not neutral pieces of data. They are highly political and deeply flawed social products. For researchers and families trying to understand their origins, you must stop placing blind faith in the authority of state bureaucracy. You must always actively question the administrative machinery of the end of life. Only by challenging the finality of the pre-printed box can the actual truth of a complex human life be permanently salvaged from the bureaucracy of its ending.